a gorgeous day. Walking past the school today, I couldn't help but wonder how many of these innocent children will be addicted to opioids. Actually, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, about 12% of them will be, and 6% of them will be addicted to heroin. Isn't that horrifying? The opioid epidemic, according to Lee Chapman, is the biggest health crisis of our generation. So let's take a step back and see where it all began. Thousands of years ago, people discovered that the opium poppy plant had pain-relieving qualities. This helped many people. Some examples of opioids are morphine, hydrocodone, and fentanyl. So there are three main categories. Morphine is a natural opiate, which occurs naturally in plants. Hydrocodone, however, is a semi-synthetic opioid, which is made in labs from natural opiates. Fentanyl is an example of a fully synthetic opioid, which is completely man-made. Now that we know a bit more about these drugs, we can begin to see who's affected by them. So when people hear addiction, they picture a disadvantaged section of society whose lives are distinctly different than their own, when in reality, no one is immune to this type of opioid addiction. We all assume that our neighbors are living similar lives to us. But behind closed doors, how many people are struggling with addiction? Does your neighbor have chronic pain? Did your friend's grandpa living next door break a hip? Did the young mother of 3 get into a car accident? Did your childhood teenage babysitter break her leg in 3 places? Were they prescribed extreme painkillers? Did the pain continue and they needed to refill their prescription as directed? The doctor prescribed it, so it must be safe, right? In limited doses for a short period of time, these drugs are likely fine. But the wheels fall off when life becomes better with them than without them, and patients resort to drug-seeking behavior like going to emergency rooms to complain about false pain, going to different doctors to get a refill, and then, eventually, potentially resorting to street drugs and bad behaviors. We're really just an accident or a broken bone away from potentially ruining the rest of our lives. At what point did these natural pain-relieving drugs shift from helping society to hurting society? The author of the book, Marlena, said it best by calling opioids an abuse of the cure. At least when you're taking morphine, you know what you're getting, whereas street drugs could contain anything. Remember how I mentioned fentanyl earlier? Fentanyl is an extremely dangerous drug that can kill its user instantly. The addition of fentanyl in anything can be fatal. Lately, drug dealers have been using it as a substitute in their products, which is what makes street drugs so dangerous. Purdue Pharma is an industry leader in the pharmaceutical sector and is most closely tied with class action lawsuits linked to opioid overdose. Over the past few years, many key executives and formulations employees, who are the people who make the drugs, have left Big Pharma to go to the cannabis sector. Because they know how addictive opioids are and they don't want to contribute to the opioid crisis any longer? Perhaps they have discovered cannabis to have some of the pain-relieving properties, but the negative side effects are diminished. Maybe these drug specialists are keen to find a safer alternative to opioids. Now know that opioids are highly addictive and can be a gateway drug and lead to fatal street drugs. But opioids themselves can also kill. The Morning Show stated that nearly 4,000 Canadians died of opioid overdoses in just 2017. I don't think that it would be going too far to say that death is a common side effect of opioid abuse. The best part of this whole thing is that it's completely preventable and unnecessary. Is it possible to rehabilitate those who have lost their lives to opioid addiction? It has been said that overprescribing is a huge factor in this crisis, but according to Lee Chapman, that is solely a historic problem. It has been suggested that setting up supervised injection services could help manage the problem. But when dealing with people whose philosophy is that the high is the most important thing in their life, creating a safe acquisition of the drug can't help with things like keeping a job, taking care of a family, or leading a functioning life. Another option is to set up a long-term plan with your doctor to figure out how to cope with the addiction. There's still a high risk of relapsing. From From this, I gather that prevention is key. Instead of trying to fix the problem we created, we should be focusing on avoiding the problem altogether and getting a better understanding of pain management. Doctors should stop prescribing opioids to patients with a history of drug or alcohol abuse to prevent the risk of opioid addiction. But we still, as a society, need to deal with the people who are already addicted. The economic burden on society is substantial. Treatment centers, long-term hospital stays, treating babies who were born addicted, insurance claims, robberies, vandalisms, and public safety are all important factors that need to be considered. Society's dependence on opioids has radically changed public behavior and led to the development of some new laws. Pharmacies have had to hand out free needles to reduce the spread of disease. The Good Samaritan law encourages those witnessing an overdose to call 911 without the threat of criminal prosecution. Treatment centers and supervised consumption sites are all examples of how society is trying to manage the problem. Public health is trying to educate citizens on how to treat an overdose by informing people on its dangers. These are just some of the ways that Canada is trying to manage this problem as best it can. Standing outside on a beautiful day like today, feeling the sunshine on my face, listening to the birds chirping, hearing the beautiful sounds and seeing the beautiful sights of spring, I can't imagine that for people with an opioid addiction, none of these things are important as their next high. As an advanced society, we are lucky to have access to these extremely powerful drugs, but we need to better assess when these addictive drugs are assets and when they are liabilities. So in conclusion, the short-term benefits of pain management with prescription drugs are not worth the potential risk of opioid addiction.